What's up, citizens? Welcome back to the City Daily channel, and today we're going to be talking about the Premier League. Is it becoming predictable? Now, there's a lot of talk these days, especially around City, as to whether or not we're ruining football and as to whether or not the Premier League is becoming somewhat of a farmers' league. Right? So today we're going to talk about a new model that I've come across thanks to talking to a good friend of mine from Belgium. But first off, we're going to start with just a little bit of Premier League history and a bit of context for you, right? So the Premier League was created back in 1992, and in the 29 years that it's been going, we've had 49 clubs compete in the competition, and 7 clubs have won it. Obviously, United are running away with the wins currently on 13, Chelsea on 5, City currently have 4 confirmed, but surely to get the 5th this season. Arsenal are on 3, with Leicester, Liverpool and Blackburn Rovers on 1 win apiece. Now, in the last 10 years, we've had 5 different winners, with 2 unique ones with Leicester and Liverpool, right? Now, that seems pretty competitive to me, especially when you compare it to the rest of Europe and some of the other top European leagues. So you look at Ligue 1, Serie A, and the Bundesliga. Now, respectively, PSG, Juventus and Bayern have all won 9 of the last 10 seasons, with only strange circumstances really leading to another team winning the league. Now, that is what I call uncompetitive and domestic dominance. But there are still those who think the Premier League is becoming that. And obviously the main name they throw around when they say that is dear old Manchester City. Now, while I refute the fact that we're ruining football and dominating domestically, I think the tears are delicious somewhat, and I think we obviously are winning quite a lot recently, and part of that is obviously down to the fact that we can spend money, but other teams can spend money too, they just choose to do it badly. Now, let's really get onto the actual point here. So I was having a chat with a good friend of mine from Belgium, and he was telling me that he never watches the last 10 or so games of the Premier League. So I decided to question him a little bit more about it, why, and he was saying, the point he was saying was, you know who's going to win by this point. You normally know who's going to win in the last 10 games of the season or so. And I was thinking back, and I was thinking, you know what? There is definitely some truth to that. You look back at our Centurion season, you knew we were going to win. Of course you did. You look back at Liverpool last season, you know they're going to win. You look at us currently this season, there's a pretty good chance that we're going to win. Is it becoming less competitive in that way? Well, he thought so. And he started telling me about the Jupiler Pro League, which is Belgium's top tier of football, right? Now, it was played like our league was up until about 09-10, and like most other leagues are played. But after the 09-10 season, that's when they dropped from 18 to 16 teams. Now, that was mostly to balance out the leagues in Belgium. There aren't many football teams in Belgium, and the second league, I think, had about 6 teams in it at the time, which isn't very good for a competition. I think they all ended up playing each other about 3 or 4 times in that competition, just to try and get some actual scores out of it and to have an actual season running. So they dropped it to try and improve that. But they also, and this is the kicker here, so this is the main thing we're looking at, they added a playoff. Now, the way they ran this playoff is they would play the season as normal. The 16 teams would play each other twice during the normal season, and then at the end, they would take the top 6 teams and put them into a playoff. Now, it's not the playoff you're thinking of, it's not a knockout competition like you would suspect. This one is instead a little bit weird. So they take the top 6 teams and then they halve their point total from the main body of the season. So take the 15-16 season in the Premier League, for example. Leicester were on 81 points. They would halve their points to 41 points as they round up if they're on an odd, right? Now, as a result of that, any lead that they had is also halved. So again, look at the 15-16 season with Leicester. Arsenal are on 71. Leicester are on 81. That's a 10-point gap, which is pretty unsurmountable towards the end of a season. They would need 3 wins and a draw at least to draw points, and that's counting on Leicester to lose 4 games on the trot. But now they're 2 wins away. They only need Leicester to drop 2 games, not 4. And now that is a big difference. So in the playoff, each team still plays each other twice, so it adds another 10 games onto the end of the season. And since introduction, which has been about 10 years now, there have been 4 separate winners of the Jupiler Pro League, with 5 of those wins going to RSC Anderlecht. Now, at first inspection, that obviously is less competitive than the Premier League, with 5 winners in the last 10 years, but it's not the Premier League. The Premier League is more competitive than that as it stands. So, would introducing a playoff like this throw a bit of chaos into the wind? Suddenly, those teams in 5th and 6th get another chance to fight for the Champions League spot. Suddenly, 2nd and 3rd have got a much smaller gap to jump. Right, so again, we'll look at the 15-16 season. I like this season purely because it has relatively, amenable gaps, average gaps, I would say. So Leicester obviously won that season with 81 points. Arsenal were then on 71. You then look at Spurs on 70, and then 4th were City, 5th were United, both on 66, and in 6th place, bringing up the rear, were Southampton on 63. In the playoffs then, we would halve those points. If they were odd, they would be rounded up, and all the gaps, therefore, halved with them, right? So, suddenly, our title charge is reheated. Arsenal and Spurs now find themselves just 2 wins away from winning the Premier League. What a spin that would have been, by the way, for Spurs to finally win something. Bottlers FC. City, United and Southampton are now all separated by just 1 point, making that fight for 4th place in the Champions League spot all that more enticing. Plus, there's still 10 games to play. Literally everything could change. Leicester could go on a streak of losing everything. United could come from behind and suddenly win. Southampton could do the same. There's very little between all the teams. Would it make the Premier League more exciting? Now, obviously, I've picked a title charge that was pretty surprising to all of us anyway. Leicester obviously weren't expected to win the league, and it was probably a good season for the Prem, right? But would the 10-game playoff improve the watchability of the latter end of the Premier League in general? Now, according to my friend in Belgium, it would. And I think there's definitely pros to that argument, but obviously there are still cons. The Premier League is already quite a long season. There's 38 games in a base season, and with a playoff you'd push that to 48, which, is a lot of games in a season. Now, another issue obviously would be how that would impact those teams now placed in the playoffs. They would be competing for the top trophies in Europe, Champions League, Europa League. They'd be competing for those while also fighting for their spots in them next season. That is a lot, and it would be a lot of football at the back end of a season, and a lot of pressure to put on those players. Suddenly they're fighting not just for the world's top trophies, but also to stay in the world's top trophies. Now, as intrigued as I was by this novelty, and as much as I don't think it would work at the top end of the Premier League, I think there's somewhere you could fit it instead. And that's relegation. The relegation battle for a while now has been relatively stagnant. The same teams fall into it pretty much most seasons. At least 1 or 2 of the promoted sides end up getting relegated again. The odd shocker thrown in there with a Newcastle or a West Ham or something. Now, that's a bit boring. But maybe we could change that. So, the bottom 3 teams of the Premier League are automatically relegated as we stand. The top 2 teams of the Championship are automatically promoted as we stand. And then places 3rd to 6th in the Championship have a nice little playoff between themselves where they get to choose who gets promoted and retain their place in the Premier League. But should the 6th place spot in the Championship be opened up to the 18th spot in the Premier League? Let's take the 15-16 Premier League season again. So, Newcastle are in 18th. They've been struggling all season. They've been fighting to try and stay in the Premier League, but they just can't quite do it. However, this season they've been thrown a lifeline. They are allowed to play in the Championship playoffs. They play in the sixth spot in the Championship instead of Sheffield Wednesday, and they will go into the playoffs to play Brighton in the semi-finals and possibly even Hull City in the final. Would they make it? Let me know down below. It's an interesting concept nonetheless. And while I don't think it would go down very well with the FA or with the Championship, it's a nice little thing to think about, isn't it? And would it make the end of the season a little bit more suspenseful and a little bit more interesting, especially for casual viewers? And it gives a chance for a rising team, a Championship side, to prove themselves worthy of the Premier League, or a Premier League side to prove they're not ready to go down quite yet. Now obviously I've broached two relatively big changes to the Premier League there, either at the top or at the bottom, so let me know which one you think is best down below, and don't forget to like and subscribe if you've liked this content, and obviously comment if you're feeling just a little bit fruity, so do let me know. I've been Kieran. This has been the City Daily Football Channel. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you, citizens, and I really do hope that you enjoy the rest of your day. Up the Blues.